Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. You know, there's an old saying that I'm sure you've heard 1,000 times. Living well is the best revenge. It's a comforting thought, isn't it? The idea that by simply picking yourself up, dusting yourself off, and building a better life, you somehow win against those who tried to drag you down. It suggests a kind of passive, quiet victory. But what happens when living well isn't just a passive state of being? What happens when it actively, and almost poetically, puts you in the perfect position to come face to face with the very person who made your life a living hell? Today, we're diving into that very scenario. We're exploring a collection of incredible stories about karmic justice, where the tables don't just turn, they flip over with a spectacular, almost surgical professional grace. These are tales of protagonists who, through sheer hard work and determination, find themselves in positions of power they never could have imagined. And from that vantage point, they look down to see a familiar face from their past, hand outstretched, asking for a job. Get ready for some of the most satisfying stories of quiet, ice-cold revenge you've ever heard. Let's dive in. Our first story takes us back to a place I think we can all relate to, for better or for worse. High school. It's a time of intense social pressure, of trying to figure out who you are while everyone around you seems to have already made up their mind about you. For some, it's the peak of their lives. For others, it's a trial by fire. Our protagonist was firmly in that second category, and the person holding the torch was a bully who seemed to take a special, cruel pleasure in making his life miserable. 20 years is a long time. It's enough time to forget the sting of old wounds, to move on, to become an entirely different person. But some memories, they don't fade. They just lie dormant, waiting for the right trigger. And for our narrator, that trigger was a single name on a PDF, glowing on his monitor on an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday afternoon. The story begins not in a sleek, modern office, but in the damp, echoing corridors of a high school that smelled perpetually of floor wax and teenage anxiety. Let's call our protagonist Leo. Back then, Leo was the classic nerd archetype before it became cool. This was the late 90s, early 2000s. Being into computers meant you were a geek, not a future tech mogul. Loving sci-fi and fantasy novels meant you were weird, not a connoisseur of intricate world building. Leo was quiet, a bit awkward, and had a small, tight-knit circle of friends who shared his passions. They were the kids who spent their lunch breaks in the library, discussing the finer points of Star Trek starship design or planning their next Dungeons and Dragons campaign. And then there was Kevin. Kevin was the polar opposite. He was the king of the school, or at least he acted like it. A star on the football team, blessed with the kind of lazy, unearned confidence that draws people in. He walked through the halls with an entourage, a revolving cast of jocks and popular girls who laughed at his every joke. And his favorite joke, it seemed, was Leo. The bullying wasn't just casual name-calling. It was systematic and deeply personal. Kevin had zeroed in on Leo's perceived weaknesses with a cruel precision. He targeted his hobbies, calling D&D a game for freaks. He targeted his quiet nature, interpreting it as a sign of something else. The main focus of his torment was Leo's perceived sexuality. Kevin would lead his friends in chanting slurs in the hallway, loud enough for everyone to hear, but just quiet enough for teachers to ignore. He'd accidentally knock books out of Leo's hands, sending papers scattering across the grimy linoleum floor. He'd shoulder check him into lockers, always with a sneering, "Watch where you're going, weirdo." Leo's internal world was a constant state of high alert. Every walk to class was a strategic mission. Which hallway was Kevin likely to be in? Was it safer to take the long way around past the science labs? He learned the rhythms of the school bell not as a guide for his education, but as a timer for his own safety. His stomach would clench into a tight, acid-filled knot whenever he heard Kevin's booming laugh echoing from down the hall. He felt a profound sense of injustice, a burning helplessness that he swallowed down day after day. He would retreat into his worlds of fantasy and code, places where the rules were fair, where intelligence was rewarded, and where heroes, no matter how unassuming, could eventually triumph over evil. It was his only escape. High school ended as it always does. Leo went off to college, then grad school, pouring all that focused intellectual energy that Kevin had mocked into a degree in computer science and software engineering. He found his tribe, people who spoke his language, who didn't just tolerate his passions but celebrated them. He got a job at a small tech startup, then another, bigger one. He worked relentlessly, driven by a deep-seated need to prove his worth, not just to the world but to that scared kid still cowering inside him. He climbed the corporate ladder, not by being ruthless, but by being brilliant. He was a natural leader, empathetic and insightful, precisely because he knew what it felt like to be on the bottom. Fast forward 20 years. Leo is now a senior hiring manager at a major tech firm. He has a corner office with a panoramic view of the city skyline. He's respected, successful, and happy. The skinny, awkward boy is gone, replaced by a confident man in his late 30s. The memories of high school are like a blurry, black and white film he rarely watches. Until that Tuesday. He was sipping his second coffee of the day, scrolling through a list of candidates for a mid-level project manager position. It was a routine task, one he'd done hundreds of times. Click, scan, resume, sort into yes, no, or maybe piles. His mouse hovered over a new application. The name on the file read, Kevin last name. Leo froze. His fingers went stiff on the mouse. The name was common enough it could be a coincidence. But then he saw the high school listed under the education section. The same high school, the same graduation year. A cold jolt, a phantom echo of old fear shot through his veins. He felt his heart rate quicken, the coffee turning sour in his stomach. He clicked open the resume, his breath held tight in his chest. And there it was. The life story of the man who had made his own life a living hell, laid out in sterile, professional bullet points. The resume was mediocre, at best. Kevin had apparently bounced around a series of sales jobs at second-rate companies. There were gaps in his employment history. The language he used was full of empty corporate buzzwords that tried to mask a clear lack of real achievement. The king of the school had, it seemed, peaked at 17. There was a desperate air to the document, the feeling of a man in his late 30s trying to recapture some long-lost glory. Leo leaned back in his ergonomic chair, the leather creaking softly. The view of the city suddenly seemed distant. He was back in those hallways, the smell of floor wax in his nostrils, the sound of jeering laughter in his ears. The anger, the humiliation, the helplessness. It all came rushing back, not as a flood, but as a slow, cold tide. For a moment, a wave of pure, unadulterated spite washed over him. He could bring him in for an interview. He could sit across a polished mahogany table, holding all the power, and watch Kevin squirm. He could ask him pointed questions, make him sweat, and then at the very end reveal who he was. He pictured the look on Kevin's face, the dawning recognition, the horror, the humiliation. The fantasy was delicious, a perfectly crafted revenge scene worthy of a movie. He could almost taste it. But then, just as quickly, the feeling subsided. What would that accomplish? It would be a momentary thrill, a fleeting satisfaction, but it would also, in a way, be stooping to Kevin's level. It would be an admission that those old wounds still held power over him, that the boy in the hallway still dictated the actions of the man in the corner office. Leo looked around his office. He saw the framed pictures on his desk of his wife and 2 kids. He saw the industry awards on his shelf. He saw the whiteboard covered in complex architectural diagrams for a project he was leading, a project that would be used by millions of people. He had built this life. He had earned this success. He didn't need to perform some elaborate revenge theater to validate it. The validation was all around him. He turned back to the screen. Kevin's resume was still there, a digital ghost from a past he had long since escaped. He didn't feel anger anymore. He didn't even feel pity. He felt nothing, just a quiet, profound sense of distance. Kevin wasn't a monster anymore. He was just a mediocre applicant with a spotty work history. He was just a name on a list. Leo moved the mouse cursor. He dragged the file from the review folder into the reject folder. A small pop-up appeared from the HR software asking for a reason for the rejection. He clicked the drop-down menu. There were several standard options. Not enough experience, skills don't match requirements, position already filled. He scrolled past them all and chose Other. A text box appeared. He thought for a moment, a slow, wry smile spreading across his face. He typed 2 words, a phrase that was both perfectly professional and exquisitely, devastatingly personal. Culture fit. He clicked Submit. The application vanished from his queue. The loop was closed. There was no grand confrontation, no dramatic speech. Just a quiet click, a silent dismissal. Leo took a slow sip of his now lukewarm coffee. He had won. He had won 20 years ago when he decided to build a life so successful, so full, that a man like Kevin could only ever hope to apply for a small part in it, and be quietly, professionally, and utterly denied. Let's take a moment to really break down the quiet brilliance of that revenge. The temptation for a big, theatrical confrontation must have been immense. Imagine the adrenaline, the sheer drama of calling Kevin into that glass-walled office and laying it all bare. But Leo understood something profound. A loud, emotional revenge would have given Kevin importance. It would have framed the encounter as a showdown between 2 old rivals, placing them on equal footing. But they weren't equals, not anymore. By handling it as a mundane administrative task, Leo delivered a much deeper, colder message. The message was, "You are no longer a character in my story. You are not the villain, not the rival. You are just a line item, an email, a task to be cleared from my inbox. The 20 years of your life that led you here and the 20 years of my life that led me here have resulted in this. Me in a position of power and you, a resume I can dismiss with a single click. We are not the same." The choice of the phrase culture fit is just surgical. It's the perfect corporate shield. It's impossible to argue against. It's not about skills which can be learned. It's not about experience which can be gained. It's an assessment of one's very character. In that context, bad culture fit was the most professionally acceptable way for Leo to say, "The person you were then, and the person you clearly still are, has no place in the world I have built." And that, right there, is a masterclass in professional revenge. It's a victory that doesn't require a single raised voice. Now we're going to shift gears. We're moving from the battleground of high school hallways to the far more complex and intimate battlefield of the heart. Teenage bullies inflict a specific kind of pain, one rooted in social hierarchy and insecurity. But the betrayal of a romantic partner, someone you've built a life with, someone you've trusted with your future, that's a different kind of wound altogether. It strikes at the very core of your identity and self-worth. Our next story is about a man whose wife left him for someone she deemed more successful, a man on a faster track, a bigger winner. It's a brutal, deeply personal rejection. But what happens when the years pass, the tables turn, and the so-called winner walks into your office, looking for a job, completely oblivious to the fact that he's about to ask for a lifeline from the very man whose life he helped torpedo? This isn't just about getting even. This is about rewriting the entire narrative. Let's call our protagonist David. When we first meet him, metaphorically speaking, his life is a comfortable, well-worn sweater. He and his wife, Sarah, had been together since college. Their life wasn't flashy, but it was theirs. They had a small, cozy apartment filled with mismatched furniture from their parents and a few cherished pieces they'd bought together. Their evenings were spent on a slightly sagging sofa, debating what to watch on TV, their feet tangled together under a shared blanket. They talked about the future in that soft, hopeful way young couples do. A house with a small yard for a dog, maybe kids one day, promotions at their respective jobs. David was a software developer at a stable if unexciting company. He was good at his job, respected by his peers, and enjoyed the intellectual challenge of solving complex problems. He wasn't gunning for the CEO position. His ambition was quieter. He wanted to provide a good life, to build something lasting and real with the woman he loved. He believed they were a team, building their future brick by brick together. The change was gradual, almost imperceptible at first. Sarah had taken a new job in marketing at a high-flying, aggressive startup. The culture was all about hustle, about closing deals and crushing targets. She started working later, her phone buzzing with work emails at all hours. When she came home, she was wired, talking a mile a minute about synergy and disruption and scaling. David would listen, trying to keep up, but a gap was slowly, surely opening between them. Then a new name started to pepper her stories, Greg. Greg was a senior sales executive at her company, the star player, the rainmaker. "You wouldn't believe the deal Greg closed today," she'd say, her eyes shining with an admiration David hadn't seen directed at him in a long time. It was always Greg this, Greg that. Greg's new sports car. Greg's condo downtown. Greg's incredible ambition. Slowly, the admiration for Greg began to curdle into criticism of David. His stability was rebranded as stagnation. His contentment became a lack of drive. "Don't you ever want more, David?" she'd ask, a sharp, dismissive edge to her voice. "Greg is aiming for VP by next year. He's on a rocket ship." The subtext was deafening, "and you're still on the launch pad." The discovery, when it came, was almost a cliché. An email left open on her laptop. A hotel confirmation. A chain of messages that spoke of a passion and excitement that had long since vanished from their own lives. When David confronted her, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird, he expected tears, apologies, denials. He got none of that. What he got was a cold, clinical assessment of his own inadequacy. Sarah sat across from him at their small kitchen table, the one they'd spent a whole weekend assembling, and she dismantled their entire life together with a few brutal sentences. "It's not just about the affair, David," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "That's just a symptom. The problem is us. It's you. You're just comfortable. You're happy to tread water. Greg isn't like that. He pushes himself. He wants to conquer the world. He makes me feel alive." David just stared at her, speechless, the words hitting him like physical blows. She delivered the final, fatal wound. "I've thought about this a lot. I need to be with a winner, David, someone who is going places, and that's not you." The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. "That's not you." It was a complete and utter invalidation of who he was, of the life he thought they were building. He wasn't just being left. He was being discarded for a superior model. The weeks that followed were a blur of packing boxes and hollow apologies. Sarah moved into Greg's gleaming downtown condo. David was left in the echoing silence of their once shared apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of a future that no longer existed. He was at rock bottom. Her words played on a loop in his head. "Winner, not you." For a month he wallowed. He called in sick to work, ordered takeout he barely touched, and let the crushing weight of his failure pin him to that sagging sofa. He could feel himself starting to believe her. Maybe she was right. Maybe he was just a comfortable, stagnant man destined to tread water for the rest of his life. But then one night, sitting in the dark, a different feeling began to stir beneath the grief. It was a slow-burning ember of anger. Not just at her, not just at Greg, but at the entire narrative she had written for him. He thought about his work, the complex systems he designed, the elegant solutions he built from scratch. He wasn't stagnant. He was a builder. He just hadn't been building for himself. That night something shifted. The anger became fuel. The grief became focus. He pulled out an old notebook and a pen. If he was a builder, then he would build. He wouldn't just get a new job or ask for a raise. He would build something from the ground up, something that was entirely his. He would build a company so successful that Sarah's definition of winner would look pathetic by comparison. It started in his spare bedroom, which was now just a room full of boxes. He sold his car for seed money. He worked his day job from 9 to 5, came home, and then worked on his own project from 7 in the evening until 3 in the morning. He lived on coffee and instant noodles. His social life evaporated. His world shrank to the glowing rectangle of his monitor and the sprawling diagrams on the whiteboard he'd bolted to the wall. He was building a highly specialized data analytics platform for the logistics industry, a niche he knew was underserved. It was a grueling, thankless, lonely existence. There were 100 moments when he was ready to give up, when the technical challenges seemed insurmountable, when the exhaustion was so profound he'd fall asleep at his keyboard. But every time he hit a wall, he would hear her voice in his head, "I need to be with a winner," and he would push through, powered by pure, unadulterated spite and a desperate need to prove her wrong. Slowly, painstakingly, it started to work. He landed his first small contract. He used that money to quit his day job and go full-time on his own. He hired a part-time developer, then a full-time one. He moved out of his apartment and into a tiny, windowless office. For 5 years, he poured every ounce of his being into the company. He sacrificed everything: relationships, hobbies, sleep. And then the company took off. They landed a massive client, which led to another and then another. The growth was exponential. The tiny office became a full floor in a modern office building. The two-man team grew to 50, then 100. David was no longer just a developer, he was a CEO. He was the one setting the vision, leading the team, and closing the multi-million-dollar deals. He had become, by anyone's definition, a winner. But the victory felt incomplete. The ghost of Sarah's judgment still lingered. Another 5 years passed. The company was now a major player in its field. David was financially secure beyond his wildest dreams. He was respected in his industry. He had a new life, a new partner, and a hard-won sense of peace. He rarely thought about Sarah or Greg. They were figures from a different life, a different version of himself. Until the day an email landed in his HR department's inbox and was flagged for his personal review. The position was for a senior sales director. It was a key role, and David still liked to personally vet the final candidates. The resume was forwarded to him by his head of HR with a note. "This guy looks promising. Lots of experience, though his last few years seem a bit shaky." David opened the PDF. He scanned the name at the top, Greg. His blood ran cold. He scrolled down. The work history matched. It was him. It was the man his wife had left him for. The rocket ship, it seemed, had crash-landed. Greg's resume told a story of diminishing returns. After leaving the startup where he'd worked with Sarah, he had bounced between 3 different companies in 5 years, each one a step down from the last. The winner was now job hunting. And he had, by some spectacular twist of cosmic irony, applied for a job at the company built by the man he had replaced. David felt a dizzying mix of emotions: shock, vengeance, a dark, triumphant humor. His first instinct was the same as Leo's in our previous story: delete the email, reject him outright, and never give it a second thought. It was the professional, sensible thing to do. But this was different. This wasn't a high school bully. This was the man who had been held up as the gold standard against which he had been measured and found wanting. This was the man whose supposed success was the justification for the destruction of his marriage. No, a quiet rejection wouldn't be enough. He needed to close this loop in person. He needed to see him. He typed a short reply to his head of HR. "You're right, he looks interesting. Let's bring him in for the final round. I'll handle this one myself." The day of the interview arrived. David felt a strange, detached calm. He wasn't nervous. He was a scientist about to observe the results of a decade-long experiment. He made sure the setting was perfect. The interview would be in the main boardroom, a large, intimidating space on the top floor. It had a massive oak table and floor-to-ceiling windows with a breathtaking view of the entire city. It was a room that screamed power and success. David sat at the head of the table waiting. He heard a knock. His assistant showed Greg in. He was older, of course. His confident swagger had been replaced by a kind of tense, forced bravado. His suit was expensive, but it didn't quite fit right, a little tight in the shoulders. He looked tired. The years had not been as kind to him as they had been to David. And the best part, he had absolutely no idea who David was, not a flicker of recognition in his eyes. To him, David was just the CEO, the final boss he had to impress to get the job. The power dynamic was intoxicating. "Greg, thanks for coming in," David said, his voice even and calm. He gestured to the chair at the far end of the long table. "I'm David." Greg practically jogged to the chair and sat down, fumbling with his leather portfolio. "Mr. Last Name, an absolute pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm a huge admirer of what you've built here. Truly disruptive." The interview began. David went through the motions, asking standard questions about Greg's sales philosophy, his management style, his career goals. He let Greg talk, and talk he did. He bragged about old deals, spun his frequent job hopping as a quest for new challenges, and laid the corporate jargon on thick. He was performing, trying desperately to project the image of the winner he used to be. David just listened, nodding occasionally, his face an unreadable mask of professional interest. With every word Greg spoke, the narrative that had haunted David for a decade was slowly being dismantled. This wasn't a titan of industry. This was a washed-up salesman, a man who had clearly lost his touch, trying to trade on past glories. After about 20 minutes, David decided it was time. He leaned forward, steepling his fingers on the polished surface of the table. "I have one last question for you, Greg," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "It's more of a personal one. You used to work at a company called Cybercorp, correct? About 10 years ago." Greg looked surprised by the question, but he nodded eagerly. "Yes, that's right. Great times. I was the top guy there. Really made a name for myself." "I remember," David said softly. "You worked with a woman in the marketing department there, Sarah." For the first time, Greg's mask of confidence cracked. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. Yeah, Sarah, we were together for a while. How did you know that?" David let the silence hang in the air for a few heartbeats, stretching the moment to its absolute limit. He watched as the gears in Greg's head started to turn, desperately trying to place him. He could see the dawning horror in his eyes as a 10-year-old memory began to surface. David leaned forward a little more, and his voice was barely a whisper, but it filled the cavernous room. "She used to talk about you," he said. "She told me you were a rocket ship, a real winner." And there it was, the look. The blood drained from Greg's face. His jaw went slack. The forced smile dissolved into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. It was the look of a man whose entire reality had just been ripped out from under him. He was not in a job interview. He was at a reckoning. David stood up, the picture of calm authority. "Thank you for your time, Greg. I don't think you're going to be a good fit for us here. My assistant will show you out." He didn't wait for a reply. He turned and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline, at the empire he had built not in spite of his broken heart, but because of it. He heard the door open and close softly. The experiment was over. The results were conclusive. The right man had won. That was just spectacular, wasn't it? The sheer, ice-cold precision of it. If Leo's story was a quiet, professional checkmate, David's was a full-blown cinematic masterpiece. It's one thing to deny a job to someone from your past. It's another thing entirely to conduct the entire interview, to let them perform and posture and try to sell themselves to you, all while you hold this monumental, life-altering secret. What makes this story so incredibly potent is that David didn't just get revenge on Greg. In a much more profound way, he got revenge on the very words that were used to destroy him. Sarah's justification for leaving was that Greg was a winner and David was not. She created a narrative, a story she told herself and told David, to rationalize her betrayal. For 10 years, David had to live in the shadow of that narrative. Even as he built his company, even as he achieved incredible success, that initial wound, that judgment, had to have lingered. The interview was his chance to single-handedly dismantle that false narrative piece by piece. By sitting in that chair in that boardroom at the head of that table, he wasn't just a CEO. He was the arbiter of reality. And he forced Greg to confront the true reality, that the man he and Sarah had dismissed as a non-contender had quietly, methodically, built a world so far beyond their own that they couldn't even comprehend it. The final reveal wasn't just about revealing his identity. It was about revealing the truth, and turning his back to look out the window. That was a final, silent declaration. The debate is over. I have won. The story is now officially rewritten. From the deeply personal world of romantic betrayal, we now move into the realm of professional injustice. For most of us, our careers are a huge part of our identity. We spend years honing our skills, building a reputation, and investing our time and energy into our work. So when a toxic boss unfairly fires you, it's not just an attack on your livelihood. It's an attack on your professional worth, on the very character you bring to your work. Our next story is about a woman who was fired by an insecure, toxic boss under the flimsiest, most insulting of pretenses. He used a vague, subjective criticism to push her out, a phrase designed to be impossible to defend against. Not being a team player. It's a poison dart of an accusation. But a decade is a long time. It's long enough to build a new career, a new reputation, and to find yourself in a position of surprising authority. And it's just long enough for that same old boss, his own career now stalled, to end up applying for a job reporting directly to you. Let's call our protagonist Clara. 10 years ago, she was a bright, ambitious project coordinator at a mid-sized marketing firm. She was good at her job, genuinely passionate about her work, and full of ideas. She loved the challenge of juggling complex projects and collaborating with different teams to bring a campaign to life. There was just one problem: her boss, Mr. Henderson. Alan Henderson was a walking textbook on bad management. He was a classic insecure micromanager. He demanded to be CC'd on every email. He would publicly question his team's decisions on minor details. And he had a talent for taking credit for every success while assigning blame for every failure. The team lived in a constant state of low-grade anxiety, trying to anticipate his moods and avoid his wrath. Clara's competence seemed to be a particular source of irritation for him. She was quick, efficient, and her colleagues respected her. This, in Henderson's zero-sum world, was a threat. He couldn't stand seeing someone on his team shine because he felt it somehow diminished his own light. He would actively sabotage her. In a team brainstorming session, Clara once proposed a truly innovative digital strategy for a new client. Henderson listened, stone-faced, and then dismissed it in front of everyone. A bit too blue sky, Clara. Let's stay grounded in reality. 2 weeks later, in a meeting with the company's vice president, Henderson presented Clara's strategy as his own, barely modified. The VP loved it. Henderson took the credit, beaming without even a glance in Clara's direction. She just sat there, her blood boiling, a bitter, metallic taste in her mouth. The breaking point came during a high-stakes client presentation. Clara had put in weeks of overtime preparing the deck, and the data was flawless. During the Q&A, the client asked Henderson a specific, technical question about market segmentation data. Henderson fumbled, giving a vague, buzzword-filled non-answer. Seeing the client's look of confusion and knowing the deal was on the line, Clara gently interjected. "If I may, Alan," she said, before providing a clear, concise, and accurate answer that immediately satisfied the client. They won the contract. In the taxi back to the office, the client praised Clara's quick thinking directly to Henderson. "That Clara is sharp," the client said. "You're lucky to have her on your team." Henderson just forced a tight, brittle smile and said nothing. Clara knew in that moment that she had signed her own death warrant. She had committed the cardinal sin. She had made him look bad by being good at her job. A week later, she was called into his office. The blinds were drawn. An HR representative she'd never met before was sitting in the corner, holding a folder. Henderson couldn't even look her in the eye. He mumbled something about corporate restructuring and the need to optimize team dynamics. Clara was confused. "Optimize? We just landed the biggest client this firm has seen in years." "That's not the point," Henderson said, finally looking at her, his expression cold and unyielding. "Your performance has been adequate, but there are other factors. Frankly, Clara, your attitude has been a problem. You're just not a team player." The accusation hit her like a slap in the face. A team player. Her entire job was about collaboration. She had excellent relationships with the creative department, the analytics team, everyone. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of shock and anger. "Can you give me a specific example?" Henderson just waved a dismissive hand. "I don't need to get into specifics. It's a general feeling, a pattern of behavior. You tend to go off on your own, you're not always aligned with the group's direction. It's a culture issue." And that was it. She was being fired with a vague, unsubstantiated slur against her professional character. It was a lie, and they both knew it. But it was his word against hers, and he was the one in the position of power. She was walked to her desk by the silent HR rep, told to pack her personal effects into a cardboard box, and escorted out of the building like a criminal. The walk of shame through the office, past the stunned faces of her colleagues, was one of the most humiliating experiences of her life. The next few months were brutal. Henderson's accusation haunted her. During job interviews, when asked why she left her last position, she had to stumble through a vague answer. She could feel the doubt in the interviewer's eyes. The label "not a team player" is a red flag, a professional curse. She began to second-guess herself. Was she difficult? Was she arrogant? Henderson's lie had wormed its way into her head, planting a seed of self-doubt. But Clara was a fighter. She finally landed a contract role at another company, a place with a much healthier, more supportive culture. She was so paranoid about being seen as a poor collaborator that she went above and beyond. She organized team lunches. She mentored junior employees. She made a point of publicly praising her colleagues' contributions. She worked to become the most collaborative, most supportive teammate imaginable, not because Henderson was right, but as an act of defiance against his lie. And it worked. Her talent, now free from the oppressive shadow of a toxic boss, flourished. After her contract was up, she was hired full-time. Within 2 years, she was promoted to manager. She discovered she had a real talent for leadership, for nurturing talent, for building cohesive teams, for championing good ideas no matter where they came from. She was everything Henderson was not. Another 7 years passed. Clara's career was on a steep upward trajectory. She moved to a larger, more prestigious company, and after a few years of stellar work, she was promoted to Senior Director of Marketing. She was now in charge of a large department, with multiple managers reporting to her. She had built a reputation as a tough, fair, and incredibly effective leader. The memory of Alan Henderson had faded, a sour footnote in a story that had otherwise become a resounding success. One rainy Thursday afternoon, she was reviewing the final candidates for a senior manager position that had opened up on her team. This person would report directly to her. Her HR business partner had forwarded her the top 3 resumes. She opened the first file, and then the second, and then the third. Her heart stopped. On the third resume, the name stared back at her from the top of the page: Alan Henderson. She felt a jolt, a strange mix of nausea and a cold, electrifying thrill. It was him. The resume told a predictable story. After she had been fired, he'd stayed at the old firm for another year or 2 before it was acquired. Since then, he'd bounced around a couple of manager-level roles at unremarkable companies. His career had completely flatlined. The insecure micromanager had, it seemed, failed to climb any higher. And now, out of desperation or sheer cosmic coincidence, he was applying for a job where his success or failure would be entirely in her hands. Her first impulse was pure, petty revenge. She imagined bringing him in for an interview just like in our last story. She could grill him, humiliate him, and then reveal who she was. She could reject him to his face, telling him he wasn't a good fit for the team. But as she thought about it, it felt too dramatic, too emotional. It would give him too much importance. Henderson's style was never a dramatic confrontation. It was cold, impersonal, bureaucratic cruelty. He had used the system against her, and a slow, cold smile spread across Clara's face. She realized the most fitting revenge was not to break the rules, but to use them with absolute, surgical precision. She wasn't going to just reject him. That was too quick. She was going to let him have a little hope first. She sent a note to HR. Let's proceed with all 3 candidates. Standard process. Over the next 2 weeks, Clara silently monitored the process. She saw the note in the system when Henderson completed his initial phone screening with HR. She pictured him on the other end of the line, putting on his best professional voice, feeling confident. A week later, she saw that he had completed a video interview with one of the managers who would have been his peer. The feedback from her manager was lukewarm. Experienced, but seems a bit stuck in his ways. Maybe worth a final conversation. Clara could see the whole narrative playing out in Henderson's mind. He had passed 2 stages. He was a final candidate. The next step was the interview with the hiring manager, the big boss, the senior director. He was so close. He was probably already imagining his new office, his new salary. He was probably relieved that his run of bad luck was finally over. The day before the final interviews were scheduled, Clara sent an email to her HR partner. It was a simple, direct message. "Hi Jane," she wrote. "After reviewing the feedback, I've decided to move forward with the other 2 candidates. Please send the standard rejection notice to Mr. Henderson. There's one small change I'd like you to make, however. Could you please customize the subject line for me?" Jane replied almost instantly. "Of course, what would you like it to say?" Clara leaned back in her chair. She thought of that humiliating walk out of the office, box in her hands. She thought of his cold, dismissive voice. She thought of the poisoned dart of a phrase he had used to kneecap her career. And she began to type. "Please make the subject line this exactly as written. Regarding your application, not a team player." She stared at the words on the screen. It was perfect. It was a ghost from his past, speaking to him in his own language. It was a rejection that offered no explanation and allowed for no appeal. It was a cold, bureaucratic dismissal that would hit him with the force of a personal vendetta. It was the perfect, poetic closing of a 10-year-old wound. She hit send. Somewhere across town, Alan Henderson's phone would buzz. He'd see an email from a company he was so close to joining. He'd open it, full of hope. And then he'd see that subject line, and for a moment he would be utterly confused. And then the cold, dawning realization would hit him. And he would know with absolute certainty that his past had finally and brutally caught up with him. Now that is what you call a callback. The sheer poetic justice of Clara's revenge is just breathtaking. Unlike David's very personal, in-your-face confrontation, Clara's approach was detached, cold, and systemic. And that's what makes it so perfect. Henderson's crime wasn't one of passion. It was a cold, calculated abuse of corporate power. He used the impersonal machinery of human resources to dispose of someone he saw as a threat. So for Clara to turn around and use that exact same machinery against him a decade later is just chef's kiss. The beauty of it is in its deniability. If he ever complained, what could he say? That the subject line of a standard rejection email was mean. He'd look insane. She gave him a taste of his own medicine in the most refined, professional way possible. She didn't need to see his face. She didn't need to hear him squirm. She just needed to write the final sentence to that chapter of her life. And that final sentence was a subject line, delivered with ice-cold precision, that turned his own weapon back on him. It's a quiet, brutal, and utterly brilliant form of closure. We've explored revenge in the context of social hierarchy, romantic betrayal, and professional injustice. Our next story elevates the stakes once again. This isn't about a single job or a past relationship. This is about legacy, family honor, and the long, slow, grinding game of business rivalry. It's about a young man who isn't just fired, but deeply insulted and dismissed by an older, arrogant rival of his father's. The insult isn't just aimed at him. It's aimed at his entire family, at their ambition, at their very place in the world. This story shows us that sometimes, the most devastating revenge isn't a quick, satisfying takedown. Sometimes, the best revenge is a decade-long obsession. It's the slow, methodical process of building an empire, not just to prove someone wrong, but to grow so powerful that you can reach out and surgically dismantle the very foundation of their success, all while they watch, helpless. This is a story about playing the long game. Our story begins with a young man we'll call Liam. Liam's father, Mr. Davies, owned a small, respected manufacturing business. Davies and Son was known in their niche industry for quality craftsmanship and honest dealing. They weren't the biggest player on the block, but they had a loyal client base and a reputation for excellence. The biggest player, the undisputed king of their local industry, was a man named Marcus Thorne. Thorne was old money, third-generation CEO of a company that had dominated the market for decades. He was arrogant, ruthless, and utterly dismissive of smaller competitors like Davies and Son, whom he regarded as little more than a persistent gnat. He was the kind of man who wore his success like a suit of armor, using it to intimidate and belittle anyone he deemed beneath him. During a summer break from college, Liam, wanting to learn the business from every angle, made a bold decision. He decided to get a temporary job on the factory floor at Thorne's company, using a slightly different version of his name to avoid immediate detection. He wanted to see how the big machine operated from the inside. For a few months, it worked. He kept his head down, worked hard, and learned a lot. But eventually, someone connected the dots, and word got back to Thorne that the son of his rival was working in his factory. Thorne, rather than being impressed by the young man's initiative, saw an opportunity for a power play. He summoned Liam to his office. It was the kind of office designed to intimidate: dark wood paneling, a desk the size of a small car, and a commanding view from the top floor. Thorne sat in a high-backed leather chair like a king on his throne. "I know who you are," Thorne began, his voice dripping with condescension. He didn't offer Liam a seat. He let him stand in the middle of the vast room like a peasant being judged. "I have to admit, I'm not sure whether to be amused or insulted that a Davies thinks he can learn anything here." Liam stood his ground. "I just wanted to get some experience, Mr. Thorne." Thorne let out a short, humorless laugh. "Experience? Let me give you some experience. You're fired, of course. But before you go, I want you to take a message back to your father. Tell him that this little hobby of his, this quaint little workshop, is never going to be anything more than what it is. It's a small pond for small fish." He then fixed his gaze on Liam, his eyes cold and dismissive. "And you're just a chip off the old, insignificant block. You don't have the stomach, the ambition, or the bloodline to play in the big leagues. You're a small-timer just like him. Now get out of my company." The words were designed to be as demeaning as possible. It was a complete dismissal of Liam's potential, his father's life's work, and his family's name. Humiliated and seething with a cold, white-hot rage, Liam walked out of that office. But he wasn't defeated. He was ignited. That insult was the spark that would light a decade-long fire. He went straight to his father's office at their much smaller, much more modest facility. He recounted the entire conversation, word for word. His father, a proud but quiet man, listened patiently, his face growing grim. When Liam was finished, his father simply nodded. "Men like Thorne," he said, "build their castles on foundations of arrogance. Eventually, they rot from within." "I'm not going to wait for it to rot, Dad," Liam said, his voice low and intense. "I'm going to tear it down. I'm going to take everything from him. One day, that man is going to regret ever speaking our name." From that day forward, Liam's life had a singular purpose. He finished his degree in business and engineering in record time and joined Davies and Son full-time. But he wasn't just joining the family business. He was taking it to war. The next 10 years were a blur of relentless, backbreaking work. Liam became the driving force of the company. He worked 18-hour days, 7 days a week. He was the first one in the morning and the last to leave at night. He pored over schematics, optimized production lines, and renegotiated contracts with suppliers. He convinced his father to take out a substantial loan to invest in state-of-the-art German machinery that dramatically improved their quality and efficiency. While Thorne's company was complacent, relying on its old reputation, Liam was innovating, pushing, always looking for an edge. He built a new sales team from the ground up, hiring hungry, ambitious people like himself. He implemented a modern software system to manage their logistics, something Thorne's company still did with spreadsheets and paper files. Davies and Son was becoming leaner, faster, smarter, and more agile. Their reputation for quality was now matched by a reputation for innovation. They started winning bigger contracts, stealing smaller clients from Thorne, who barely seemed to notice the ground crumbling beneath his feet. But Liam never took his eyes off the main prize. From the very beginning, he had identified Thorne's greatest vulnerability, a single, massive client named Apex Industries. Apex was a national conglomerate that accounted for nearly 40% of Thorne's annual revenue. The contract was old, a legacy relationship that Thorne's company had held for decades. Thorne was complacent. He took them for granted. Liam, on the other hand, became obsessed with Apex. For years, he studied them from afar. He read their annual reports. He followed their executives on LinkedIn. He learned everything there was to know about their business, their challenges, and their goals. He tailored the evolution of Davies and Son with one goal in mind: to one day become the perfect, indispensable partner for Apex Industries. He invested in specific technologies he knew Apex would need in the future. He made sure his company got the specific quality certifications he knew Apex valued. He was building a custom-made key to a lock that wasn't yet available. After nearly a decade of meticulous preparation, the moment arrived. A contact Liam had cultivated over the years tipped him off that the long-term contract between Thorne and Apex was finally up for a competitive review. For Thorne, it was a routine renegotiation. For Liam, it was the culmination of his life's work. Liam's team swooped in. They didn't just send a proposal, they requested a top-level strategic meeting with the entire executive board of Apex. Liam led the presentation himself. He walked into their boardroom, not as the kid who was fired 10 years ago, but as the dynamic, confident CEO of a cutting-edge company. His presentation was a masterpiece. He started by acknowledging the long history Apex had with Thorne. Then he systematically and politely dismantled the value proposition. He showed them data on Thorne's declining efficiency, his lack of innovation, his higher-than-average costs. Then he presented his own company. He didn't just offer a better price. He offered a vision. He laid out a 5-year strategic partnership plan, showing Apex how Davies and Son would not only save them 10% on costs in the first year, but how their superior technology and logistics would streamline Apex's own production, saving them millions more down the line. He presented solutions to problems Apex's board hadn't even fully articulated yet. It was an overwhelming display of competence and strategic thinking. The Apex board was stunned. They had been sleepwalking through their relationship with Thorne for years, and Liam had just thrown a bucket of ice water on them. News of the meeting got back to Thorne, who flew into a panic. He immediately called his contacts at Apex, offering a massive, last-ditch price cut. But it was too late. Liam hadn't sold them on price, he had sold them on progress. Thorne was offering them a discount on the past. Liam was offering them a partnership for the future. 2 weeks later, Liam got the call. Apex Industries was awarding Davies and Son an exclusive 10-year contract. All of their business would be pulled from Thorne, effective in 90 days. Liam hung up the phone. There was no triumphant shout. There was only a deep, profound sense of quiet, bone-deep satisfaction. He walked into his father's office, where the older man was reviewing some paperwork. "Dad," Liam said, his voice thick with emotion, "I just signed Apex." Mr. Davies looked up, his glasses perched on his nose. He took them off slowly. A slow smile spread across his face, a smile of immense fatherly pride. "I knew you would," he said. Liam hadn't just won a client. He had surgically removed the heart of his rival's company. Losing the Apex contract was a death blow for Thorne. Within a year, his company would be forced into massive layoffs. Within 2, it would be sold for parts. Liam never saw Marcus Thorne again. He didn't need to. He hadn't just proven the man wrong. He had erased him from the board. The small-timer had not only made it to the big leagues, he had bought the whole stadium. That was the long game in action, a masterclass in strategic revenge. What separates Liam's story from the others is its sheer scale and patience. This wasn't about a single, satisfying moment of confrontation. This was a decade-long siege. Marcus Thorne fired Liam with a few contemptuous words, a momentary act of cruelty. Liam responded by dedicating 10 years of his life to building a corporate war machine, with the sole purpose of dismantling Thorne's empire, brick by brick. The revenge here wasn't emotional, it was economic. It wasn't a personal jab, it was a knockout blow delivered on a corporate balance sheet. By winning the Apex contract, Liam didn't just hurt Thorne's pride, he eviscerated his company's future. He attacked the very source of Thorne's power and arrogance, his business success, and proved it to be a hollow shell. And at its heart, this was about family. Thorne's insult was directed as much at Liam's father as it was at him. So the victory, the signing of that contract, was a vindication of the Davies family name. It was a final, definitive statement that quality, innovation, and relentless hard work will always, in the end, triumph over lazy, inherited arrogance. It's a powerful reminder that the most devastating victories aren't always won in a shouting match, but in the quiet, methodical execution of a brilliant, long-term plan. All right, we've come to our final story of the day. We've seen protagonists deny jobs, conduct devastating interviews, send poetic rejection emails, and execute corporate takeovers. Each story has been a unique flavor of karmic justice. But this last one presents a scenario that, in some ways, is the most complex and psychologically charged of them all. What happens if the revenge isn't a single, clean act? What if you can't just reject the person from your past and walk away? What if, through an unbelievable twist of corporate fate, you don't get to fire your old bully? You have to become his boss. This final story isn't about the satisfying closure of saying no. It's about the long, drawn-out, and professionally excruciating reality of saying yes. It's about a man who finds himself in a position of direct authority over the person who made his high school years a living nightmare. The revenge here isn't a moment. It's a permanent state of being, a daily exercise in wielding power with ice-cold professionalism, where every project assignment, every performance review, is a reminder of just how profoundly the tables have turned. Let's call our protagonist Sam. In high school, Sam was a quiet, studious kid. He wasn't a social outcast, but he preferred the company of a few close friends and the world of books to the loud, chaotic social scene. This made him a target for a particular type of bully, the kind who doesn't just use his fists, but his words and his social influence as weapons. That bully's name was Rick. Rick was one of those effortlessly popular kids who thrived on drama and psychological games. His bullying of Sam was insidious. He wouldn't just shove Sam in the hall. He would orchestrate social humiliation. He spread a vicious rumor that Sam had cheated on a major exam, a lie that forced Sam into a mortifying meeting with the principal to clear his name. He would accidentally spill his drink on Sam's new shirt right before a school assembly, then laugh with his friends as Sam had to sit there, soaked and embarrassed. His specialty was turning people against each other. He once managed to create a rift between Sam and his best friend over a fabricated story, a rift that took months to heal. For Sam, Rick wasn't just a tormentor. He was a source of constant, unpredictable anxiety. After high school, Sam went away to college and put that part of his life behind him. He got a degree in finance and after graduating, landed a good job as an analyst at a massive, sprawling corporation. It was the kind of company with tens of thousands of employees, a city unto itself. Sam found his niche, kept his head down, and did excellent work. He was good with numbers, and his analysis was always sharp and insightful. A few years into the job, he was walking through the crowded cafeteria when he heard a familiar, boisterous laugh. His stomach instantly clenched. He looked over, and there, holding court at a table with a group of salesmen, was Rick. He looked a little older, a little heavier, but it was unmistakably him. It turned out Rick had been hired into the sales department a few months prior. In a company of 50,000 people, fate had placed them under the same roof. For the next couple of years, they coexisted in a state of uneasy, unspoken truce. They were in completely different departments on different floors. Their paths rarely crossed beyond the occasional awkward nod in the hallway or elevator. Sam was content to keep it that way. The sight of Rick still brought back a phantom echo of that old high school dread, and he wanted nothing to do with him. Sam continued to excel as a senior analyst, earning a reputation for being reliable and brilliant. Rick, ever the schmoozer, had talked his way into a junior management role, overseeing a small team of sales reps. The truce was shattered during a major cross-departmental project. Sam was the lead analyst, responsible for providing the data that would guide the sales team's strategy. Rick was the manager for one of those teams. From the start, Rick was difficult. He was dismissive of Sam's data, he was arrogant in meetings, and he treated Sam not as a professional peer, but as some nerdy underling. The real trouble began when Rick's team started to fall behind its targets. The data clearly showed they were focusing on the wrong client profiles. Sam tried to explain this to Rick in a meeting, pointing to the numbers. Rick, in front of everyone, got defensive and aggressive. "Maybe if your data wasn't so useless, my team would be doing better," he snapped. A few days later, Sam's boss called him into his office with a grim look on his face. "Sam, I just had a very troubling conversation with Rick from sales. He says you've been uncooperative, that you're intentionally withholding key data, and that your analysis is what's causing his team to fail. He's formally accused you of sabotaging his project." Sam was stunned. It was high school all over again. Rick, faced with his own failure, had reverted to his old playbook: lie, deflect, and try to ruin someone else to save himself. A cold fury rose in Sam's chest. This time, he wasn't a helpless teenager. He was a professional with a paper trail. "That is an absolute lie," Sam said, his voice steady. He spent the next hour with his boss, walking him through every email, every report, every meeting minute. He proved with irrefutable evidence that not only had he provided all the necessary data, but that he had explicitly warned Rick weeks ago that his strategy was flawed. By the end of it, his boss was furious at Rick. Sam's reputation was saved, and in fact, enhanced. Senior leadership was impressed with his thoroughness and professionalism under fire. Rick received a formal warning from HR, and his reputation took a significant hit. The incident was a wake-up call for Sam. The old bully was still a bully, and he would never be safe as long as they worked at the same company. This realization lit a new fire under Sam. He was no longer content to just be a quiet, reliable analyst. He wanted to be in a position where no one, especially not Rick, could ever threaten his career again. He started taking on more leadership responsibilities. He mentored junior analysts. He volunteered for high-profile projects. His bosses took notice. Within a year, he was promoted to manager, leading the entire analytics team. He was now on the corporate ladder, on the same rung as Rick. Another year went by. The company, like many large corporations, was in a constant state of flux. One morning, a company-wide email went out. A major reorganization of the commercial division was underway. Several departments were being merged to create new, integrated business units. Sam read the email, his heart pounding as he got to the key paragraph. The sales analytics department and the regional sales department were to be combined into a new strategic sales and analytics division. A new org chart was attached to the email. Sam's hands were trembling slightly as he clicked the file open. He scrolled down, looking for his name, and then he saw it. There, at the top of the new division, was a new director role, and in that box was his name. He had been promoted again. He was now a director. A dizzying wave of relief and excitement washed over him. Then his eyes drifted down to the line of managers who would now be reporting to him. He saw the names of his old analytics team leads. He saw the names of the other sales managers. And then he saw the last name on the list, Rick. Manager, regional sales team, be reporting directly to Sam, director of strategic sales and analytics. The world seemed to slow down. The ambient noise of the office faded into a dull roar. He stared at the chart, at the neat black line connecting his box to Rick's. He was Rick's boss. The thought was so staggering, so utterly inconceivable, that he almost laughed out loud. The universe didn't just turn the tables. It had chained his former tormentor to the leg of one and given Sam the key. The news spread through the office like wildfire. Sam saw Rick later that day in a large town hall meeting where the new structure was being officially presented. He watched as the giant slide with the new org chart flashed up on the screen. He saw Rick, sitting a few rows ahead, go rigid. He saw his shoulders slump as if under a physical weight. He saw him stare at the screen in stunned, silent horror. Their eyes met for a fleeting second across the crowded room. In Rick's eyes, Sam didn't see anger or defiance. He saw something he had never seen there before: fear. The next Monday morning, the new reality began. At 10:00 a.m., Sam had a calendar appointment. Introductory one-on-one. Sam, director, and Rick, manager. Rick knocked on the door of Sam's new, larger office. "You wanted to see me, boss," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. The swagger was gone. The arrogance was gone. He looked like a man walking to his own execution. Sam gestured to the chair in front of his desk. "Come in, Rick. Close the door." Rick shuffled in and sat down, his eyes fixed on the floor. He was clearly bracing for a tirade, a lecture, a litany of all his past sins. He was expecting Sam to finally, after all these years, let him have it. But Sam did something far more cruel. He was perfectly, inhumanly professional. "All right, Rick," Sam began, his voice calm and measured as if he were talking to any other direct report. "I've had a look at your team's performance metrics for the last 2 quarters. They're not great. We're going to need to turn that around. I'm implementing a new weekly reporting process. I'll need a detailed pipeline and activity report from you and your team on my desk every Friday by 5:00 p.m. No exceptions." He continued, laying out his vision for the new division, the new KPIs, the new expectations. He spoke of accountability, of performance, of results. He didn't mention high school. He didn't mention the sabotage incident. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gloat. He treated Rick with the same cold, detached professionalism he would any other employee. And Rick just sat there, shrinking in his chair, nodding along, his face pale. He was in hell. This was so much worse than being yelled at. This was the cold, sterile, corporate hell of knowing that your entire professional fate, your salary, your bonus, your career, your ability to pay your mortgage, was now in the hands of the kid whose life you once made miserable for sport. The revenge wasn't a single moment. It was the daily grind. It was every time Rick had to bring a proposal to Sam for approval. It was every time Sam would review Rick's reports and send them back with corrections highlighted in red. It was the annual performance review, where Sam sat across the table from Rick and calmly, objectively, rated his performance as meets expectations, a perfectly average, soul-crushing assessment. Sam never abused his power. He never had to. The power itself was the punishment. The simple, undeniable fact of their new reality was a constant, grinding humiliation for Rick. He was trapped. If he quit, it would look like he couldn't handle the new leadership. If he stayed, he had to endure the daily, quiet torture of being utterly and completely at the mercy of his former victim. Sam had won the most profound victory of all. He didn't have to fire his bully. He just had to manage him. And he did with perfect, terrifying professional grace.